The Christmas dinner table glittered under the warm glow of the chandelier, a sprawling landscape of fine china, polished silver, and crystal glasses half-filled with rich, red wine. Laughter and the cheerful cacophony of my family's voices filled the air, a familiar soundtrack to a scene I had once cherished. Plates were passed, piled high with roasted turkey, honey-glazed ham, and herb-stuffed dressing. The air was thick with the comforting scents of the holiday, cinnamon, pine, and roasting meat. I sat at the head of the table, as I always had, a position that once felt like a place of honor but now felt like a throne of quiet observation. My daughter, Julia, sat to my right, her laughter ringing out, clear and bright, as her husband, Cody, told some animated story that had everyone captivated. My grandchildren, Emma and Tommy, were at the far end, engrossed in their own world of new toys and excitement. For all the world, we were the picture of a perfect, loving family. The gifts had been exchanged earlier, a whirlwind of torn wrapping paper and exclamations of delight. A new smartwatch for Cody, an expensive leather handbag for Julia, the latest gaming consoles and tablets for the kids. The pile beneath the tree had dwindled to nothing, and the floor was a sea of crimson and gold paper. I had watched it all unfold with a quiet smile, my own modest gifts to them, a book for Julia, a tool set for Cody, educational toys for the children, received with polite, almost dismissive thanks. The conversation flowed around me, topics bouncing from vacation plans to home renovations, from new cars to private schools. I listened, adding little, my mind elsewhere. The meal was winding down. Dessert plates, smeared with the remnants of pumpkin and pecan pie, were being cleared away. The mood was sated, comfortable. That's when Julia looked around the table, a performative little frown on her perfectly made-up face. "Oh, my goodness," she said, her voice cutting through the post-dinner chatter. "I think we missed someone." The table quieted. All eyes turned to her, then followed her gaze to me. "Dad," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "We completely forgot to get you a present this year. With everything so crazy, it just slipped our minds." She offered a little shrug, a what-can-you-do gesture, and then she laughed. It wasn't a warm sound. It was a sharp, tinkling laugh that felt like shards of glass. "Oh, we forgot about you." The words hung in the air, and in the space between them, I felt the intended insult, the calculated humiliation designed for an audience of our entire family. This was their message, delivered not in private, but here, in the spotlight of Christmas dinner. "You are an afterthought. You are unimportant. You are forgotten." Cody smirked, not even bothering to hide his satisfaction. My grandchildren looked confused. My sister, Margaret, who had flown in from Phoenix, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. The room fell into an awkward, heavy silence. I felt every pair of eyes on me, waiting for my reaction, for the hurt, the embarrassment, the old man's disappointment. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water, placed the glass down, and smiled. It was a calm, measured smile that didn't reach my eyes. "It's okay," I said, my voice even and clear, belying the cold knot tightening in my chest. "Really, it's fine. But since we're exchanging gifts..." I reached slowly into the inner pocket of my suit jacket. The movement was smooth, unhurried. I pulled out a single, simple manila envelope, legal-sized and unadorned. It looked stark and out of place amidst the holiday glitter. "I have something for you, Julia. For you and Cody." The silence in the room was now absolute, so profound I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. Julia's confident smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. Cody's smirk had vanished, his eyes narrowing at the envelope. "What's that, Paul?" he asked, his tone wary. "It's a document," I said, my gaze fixed on my daughter. "A document that changes everything." I slid the envelope across the polished tabletop. It traveled the short distance between us, a silent messenger carrying the weight of 15 years. Julia hesitated for a moment before picking it up, her manicured fingers fumbling with the clasp. She pulled out the sheaf of papers. Her eyes scanned the first page, then the second. The color drained from her face with a swiftness that was almost medical. Her carefully composed expression crumbled, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. Her hand flew to her mouth, a sharp gasp escaping her lips. The pages trembled in her grasp. "What is it? What does it say?" Cody demanded, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor as he stood. He snatched the documents from her limp hands. His eyes, once full of arrogant confidence, widened as he read. I watched the blood leave his face, too, watched his jaw clench, his knuckles turn white where he gripped the papers. The room was a frozen tableau. No one moved. No one spoke. They were all watching the silent drama play out on Julia and Cody's faces, the confusion, the dawning comprehension, the sheer, gut-wrenching panic. They had turned pale, their world tilting on its axis right there at the Christmas dinner table. "You can't. This can't be," Julia stammered, her voice a thin, reedy whisper. "It's quite legal," I said, my voice still calm, though a lifetime of pain and disappointment fueled every word. "And it's very, very real." I stood up from the table, the legs of my chair making a soft sound on the floor. I didn't look at the stunned faces of my relatives. I didn't look at my weeping daughter or her furious husband. I simply looked at the document in Cody's shaking hands, the notice of eviction, giving them 48 hours to vacate the home they thought was theirs. "Merry Christmas," I said, and without another word, I turned and walked out of the dining room, through the foyer, and out the front door, leaving the shattered remains of our family Christmas behind me. The cold night air hit my face like a blessing. I walked to my car, my footsteps steady on the frost-kissed driveway. I didn't look back at the warm, glowing windows of the house. I already knew what I would see: chaos, tears, the explosive aftermath of a truth they never saw coming. I got into my car, the interior dark and silent. I didn't start the engine immediately. I just sat there, in the driver's seat, watching my breath mist in the cold air. The house, with its twinkling lights and perfect facade, stood as a monument to everything I had enabled, everything I had allowed. For 15 years, I had been the bank, the safety net, the silent partner in their charade of success. But no more. The decision to do this, to bring that envelope to Christmas dinner, hadn't been born in a moment of rage. It had been a long, cold, calculated process, engineered with the same methodical precision I had applied to my career. It had started 2 months ago, in that very house, on a rainy Tuesday evening. I had just gotten home from a long day, my keys jangling in the quiet foyer. I was tired, looking forward to nothing more complicated than a simple dinner and a quiet evening in my leather chair. That was when I heard their voices, cutting through the stillness of the kitchen. I stood in the doorway, unnoticed, my keys still in my hand, and I watched. The kitchen table, usually a clean, orderly space, was littered with a chaotic mess of papers. Bills, credit card statements, overdue notices in glaring red ink. Some were crumpled into balls, others spread flat like evidence laid out for a trial. Julia stood over them, her posture rigid. Cody lurked behind her, his arms crossed over his chest, that familiar, hateful smirk playing on his lips. "Dad, we need $15,000. Today." Julia's voice cut through the kitchen air like a blade, sharp and demanding. There was no greeting, no "how was your day?" Just the demand, laid bare on the table amidst their financial ruin. I stepped fully into the room, setting my keys on the counter with a deliberate, calm motion. 15,000, I repeated, my voice flat. "What for this time?" "The roof," Julia said, not meeting my eyes. She gestured vaguely upward. "The contractor says it's sagging. He says it could collapse any day. We have kids sleeping under that roof, Dad. Emma and Tommy. Your grandchildren." Her voice took on that manipulative, trembling quality she had perfected, designed to bypass logic and tap directly into my guilt. "Tell him about the beams, Jules," Cody chimed in, his voice a low, insistent rumble. "The support beams are rotting. It's a safety issue." "Show me the estimate," I said, my voice quiet but firm. I had learned, over the years, to ask for proof. It was a feeble defense, but it was all I had. The silence that followed my request stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap. Julia's eyes flickered to Cody, a quick, nervous glance. Cody shifted his weight from one foot to the other and cleared his throat. "We don't need estimates," he said, his tone turning belligerent. "We need action." This is the third time this month you've made us beg for what should be automatic family support. He held up 3 fingers, stabbing them in the air for emphasis. Third time. He was right about that, at least. First, it was the car transmission that had supposedly exploded on the highway. $4,000. Then, little Emma's emergency dental work, another $3,000. And now this. A pattern of perpetual crisis, always requiring immediate cash, always accompanied by promises of repayment that evaporated like mist. I'd like to see some paperwork, I said again, my voice still quiet. Just to understand the situation. Understand what? Julia's voice rose an octave, becoming shrill. That your own daughter needs help. That your grandchildren might get hurt if that roof comes down on them while they're sleeping? Is that what you need to understand? Cody leaned forward, planting his hands on the cluttered table. His breath smelled of energy drinks and something sour, like cheap whiskey. You're sitting on all that retirement money, just letting it gather dust, while we're drowning here. Doesn't family mean anything to you? Don't you think it's time to share some of that wealth with the people who actually matter? I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest, a core of ice forming around my heart. 23 years. For 23 years, I had been writing checks. 23 years of emergencies and just this once, and we'll pay you back when things get better. The ghost of my wife, Sarah, her voice soft and sensible, echoed in my memory. Paul, sometimes love means saying no. You can't keep bailing them out. You're not helping them, you're crippling them. Maybe we should sit down and go through your budget together, I suggested, clinging to the ghost of reason. I could help you see where the money is going. Maybe we can find a way to manage this without another large check. We don't need a lecture. Julia slammed her palm down on the table, making the scattered papers jump. A few fluttered to the floor. We need our family to act like family. We need support, not a financial advisor. Cody leaned in and whispered something in her ear. I caught the words selfish and holding out on us. Julia's expression, already hard, seemed to turn to stone. She drew herself up, her eyes, once so full of childish joy, now flat and cold as slate. You know what, Dad? Her voice dropped to a register I'd never heard from her before. It was cold, surgical, devoid of any warmth or affection. Maybe you should just leave. You're clearly not part of this family anymore. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. I actually took a half step back, my hand gripping the door frame for support. I felt the wood grain, solid and real, beneath my fingers, an anchor in a world that was suddenly tilting sideways. The kitchen fell into a dead silence, broken only by the low hum of the refrigerator and Cody's soft, satisfied exhale. Julia turned away from me, busying herself with gathering the fallen papers, dismissing me as if I were nothing more than a disappointing bank teller who had refused her loan application. I walked out of their house, my legs feeling disconnected from my body, moving on some automatic, numb function. I didn't say another word. I just left. As I walked to my car, I glanced back through their large kitchen window. I could see them already, talking animatedly, their postures relaxed now that the obstacle, me, had been removed. They were probably already planning their next approach, their next strategy to get the money. Or maybe they were just relieved to be rid of the stubborn old man who had finally revealed his true, selfish nature. I sat behind the wheel of my car for a long, long time, the engine off, the interior growing cold. I watched them through that warm, yellow rectangle of light, moving in their kitchen, their silhouettes acting out a pantomime of a life I had funded but was no longer welcome in. In the space between her cruel words and the crushing silence that followed, something fundamental had broken. A bond, stretched and frayed over years of manipulation, had finally snapped. Something had been irrevocably broken, something that couldn't be undone with an apology or a promised repayment. It was the moment everything changed. The engine started with a quiet, reliable purr. But I didn't drive away immediately. I sat there in the growing darkness, studying their silhouettes, memorizing the details of this moment, the chill of the leather seat, the taste of betrayal in my mouth, the absolute certainty that had settled deep in my bones. This was the end of one life and the beginning of another. I drove home to a house that felt cavernous and empty. Sarah's absence was a palpable thing, A silence that had a weight and a texture all its own. Her reading lamp still glowed softly in the corner of the living room, a habit I'd never been able to break. I poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon into one of the crystal glasses from Sarah's good set, the same set Julia had admired so many times, always with a covetous glint in her eye. I settled into my worn leather chair, the one that had molded itself to my body over the decades. The financial records. They sat in their neat, labeled files in the old oak cabinet by the window. 15 years of careful, meticulous documentation. An engineer's mind doesn't discard data. I kept every receipt, every cancelled check, every bank statement. It was a habit born of professional discipline, but now it would become my weapon. I started with the file labeled Julia, College. 4 years at Northwestern. $68,000 per year. I had taken a second mortgage on this very house, had worked 16-hour days at the plant to make those payments. Julia had called me exactly twice during her entire freshman year. The first time was to ask for money for textbooks. The second was to ask for money for a spring break trip to Cancun. I remembered driving to her campus for graduation, staying in a cheap motel 40 minutes away because all the hotels near the university were too expensive. At the graduation party, Julia had introduced me to her sorority sisters as my dad, the one who pays for everything, and she had laughed, a tinkling, charming laugh, as if it were the most endearing quality a father could possess. I moved on to the wedding file. It was even thicker. $37,000 for a single day. The photographer alone had cost more than my monthly pension. I had walked her down that flower-strewn aisle, my chest bursting with pride, while she had whispered complaints in my ear about the flowers being the wrong shade of pink. There was a record for Cody's bachelor party in Vegas. $4,000. Because tradition is important, Mr. Stewart, he had said. Then came the down payment on their first house. $45,000. It's an investment in our future, Dad, Julia had pleaded. Then, new furniture. We can't live like college students anymore, Dad. $8,000. I flipped through the records methodically, the columns of numbers adding up in my head with grim inevitability. The pattern was clear, once you looked at it with objective, dispassionate eyes. Each request followed the same script: manufactured urgency, emotional manipulation, promises of eternal gratitude that never materialized, followed by a cooling-off period before the next crisis emerged. The monthly emergencies had become as routine as the changing of the seasons. Car repairs that somehow always happened right before they were due to go on an expensive vacation. Medical bills that their insurance mysteriously didn't cover. Home improvements that were always critical safety issues requiring immediate cash. The numbers, cold and hard and undeniable, painted a stark and humiliating picture. $312,000. Over 15 years. Not loans. I finally admitted that to myself, there in the silent, lamplit room. They were gifts. One-way transfers from a foolish, sentimental old man to his entitled daughter and her shiftless, greedy husband. I closed the last file and walked to the kitchen window, the bourbon glass heavy in my hand. In the dark reflection of the glass, I could see myself clearly for the first time in years. Not a loving father, not a generous patriarch. A man who had mistaken enabling for love. A man who had confused generosity with profound weakness. Sarah's voice whispered to me again from memory, clearer than it had been in years. Paul, sometimes love means teaching consequences. You're not helping her by always giving in. You're teaching her that the world owes her something. I realized, with a clarity that was almost painful, that I hadn't been grieving the right loss tonight. I wasn't mourning the relationship with Julia, because that relationship had been dead for years, a ghost kept animate only by my refusal to acknowledge its decay. What had died today, in their kitchen, was my own willingness to pretend. What had died was the lie. The bourbon glass felt substantial in my hand, like a decision finally taking physical form. I had spent 15 years being the solution to every problem, the answer to every cry for help. I had been the foundation upon which they built their fragile, extravagant house of cards. Perhaps it was time to become something else entirely. Perhaps it was time to become the earthquake. I rinsed the glass and placed it carefully in the dishwasher. My hands were steady. My mind was preternaturally clear. The confusion, the guilt, the desperate hope for gratitude, it had all burned away, leaving behind a core of cold, hardened resolve. And for the first time in years, I knew, with absolute certainty, exactly what needed to happen next. I didn't sleep that night. Instead of going to bed, I moved to Sarah's old writing desk, the mahogany surface scarred with decades of memories. I surrounded myself with the financial records, spreading them out like architectural blueprints for a demolition project. The numbers told their brutal, unemotional story as dawn began to paint the sky in shades of grey and rose. By first light, I had calculated every penny, not just the money I'd given, but the compound interest of their ingratitude, the hidden costs of their deception, the true price of my own willful blindness. The coffee maker gurgled to life at 6:30 a.m., same as every morning for the past 20 years. But when I poured that first cup, my hands didn't shake. The decision had crystallized in the dark hours before sunrise, solid and unshakable as bedrock. I'd been approaching this wrong for 15 years, emotional thinking, sentimental thinking. It was time to apply the same methodical problem-solving that had made me successful in engineering. Define the problem, gather data, analyze weaknesses, and implement the solution with precision. The problem was clear. Julia and Cody had been systematically trained to see me as an unlimited resource rather than a person deserving of respect. My enabling had created the very monsters that now tormented me. They understood emotional manipulation, guilt trips, and manufactured crises. What they didn't understand was cold, hard logic. What they didn't understand was consequence. I opened my laptop and began researching property law, debt collection procedures, estate planning strategies. My engineering mind absorbed the information hungrily, cross-referencing statutes with their specific financial transgressions, filing away relevant legal precedents, discarding useless emotional arguments. By 9 a.m., I'd scheduled an appointment with Harold Brennan, my attorney for the past 12 years. I need to review my estate planning, I told his secretary, my voice betraying none of the storm that had raged through the night. Some recent family situations have made me reconsider my arrangements. True enough, just not the whole truth. That afternoon, I drove past Julia's house not with sadness, but with the analytical eye of a contractor assessing a failing structure. I really looked at it for the first time in years. The BMW in the driveway was this year's model. The landscaping was immaculate, probably costing more than most people's monthly salary. New windows I didn't remember from my last visit, fresh paint, a gleaming hot tub on the deck, all purchased with my money while they claimed poverty and desperation. I parked 3 blocks away and called Tom Peterson, an old friend from the plant. Over coffee at the weathered Formica counter of Meredith's Diner, I steered the conversation toward families, money troubles, the challenges of adult children. "You're lucky with Julia," Tom said, stirring a 3rd packet of sugar into his mug. "My Jessica keeps hitting us up for loans she never pays back. Same with her husband. Guy can't hold a job, but somehow always has money for his toys. How's their marriage?" I asked, the question casual, almost an afterthought. Tom snorted. "Rocky as hell. Money problems, mostly. He's got some kind of gambling problem from what my wife hears. Credit cards maxed out. Borrowing from payday loan places. But they keep up appearances, you know? New car every year, fancy vacations. All smoke and mirrors." I filed that information away, another data point in my growing analysis. Interesting. That evening, I called Julia. My voice was warm, layered with concern. "Honey, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday. I was probably too harsh." The relief that flooded her voice was so palpable it felt like a physical thing through the phone line. "Oh, Dad. I was so worried. We really do need." "I know," I cut in gently, "but I want to do this right. Let me talk to my financial advisor. See about liquidating some investments safely. These things take time when you're dealing with larger amounts." I let the phrase hang there. Larger amounts. I could practically hear the sharpening of her attention, the greedy little click in her mind. "Well," I continued, "if we're going to solve the roof problem, we might as well address some of your other issues, too. The car payments, maybe pay down some of those credit cards." I'm thinking 50, 60,000. Maybe more. The silence on the other end of the line was profound. I could imagine her heart racing, her eyes wide with avarice. Dad, that's incredible. We don't deserve. Of course you do, I said, layering my voice with paternal warmth. You're my family. After I hung up, I sat back in my chair and allowed myself a smile. Not a pleasant smile. It was the kind of smile an engineer gets when all the complex calculations finally balance, when the stress points align and the path to a solution becomes clear. I had given them 1 week. 1 week to dream of their biggest payday, 1 week to let their guard down completely. They had no idea what was actually coming for them. Harold Brennan's office smelled of old leather, lemon polish, and discreet wealth. He'd been handling my legal affairs since Sarah's estate planning, a careful man with careful words and the kind of discretion that came from 40 years of small-town practice. Paul, good to see you, he said, rising from behind his massive mahogany desk. Estate planning, you mentioned. I settled into the worn burgundy leather chair across from him. Among other things, I said, placing my briefcase on my lap. I need to understand my options regarding some significant loans I've made to family members over the years. Harold raised a bushy white eyebrow, retrieving a legal pad from his drawer. Loans. Documented financial transfers, I clarified, my voice even. Over $300,000 to my daughter and son-in-law over the past 15 years. No formal loan agreements, but there were clear, repeated verbal understandings of repayment that have not been met. For the next hour, I laid out the financial history with engineering precision. I showed him the spreadsheets, the cancelled checks, the bank transfers. I explained the pattern of requests, the promises, the consistent failure to follow through. Harold took meticulous notes, his pen scratching across the yellow paper. He asked pointed questions about dates, amounts, the specific wording of their promises. By the end of the hour, he was frowning deeply, his glasses perched on the end of his nose. Paul, he said, setting down his pen and steepling his fingers. You understand that without formal loan documentation, legally recovering this money could be complicated. I'm not interested in recovery, Harold, I said, meeting his gaze squarely. I'm interested in leverage. He leaned back, the leather of his chair creaking softly. Explain. I want to know what legal rights I have. What options exist for demanding immediate, formal repayment? What happens, legally, if they can't pay? What are the mechanisms, the procedures? A slow understanding dawned in Harold's eyes. Ah, he said softly. You're talking about applying pressure. I'm talking about teaching consequences, I corrected, my voice flat and hard. I want them to experience the full weight of the financial system they've been so casually exploiting. 3 days later, I found myself sitting across from Rebecca Martinez in her cluttered but organized office above the hardware store on 3rd Street. Harold had recommended her. Discreet, thorough, and effective, he'd said. Rebecca was a woman in her late 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes and no-nonsense demeanor. Her workspace was a controlled chaos of file boxes and computer monitors, a far cry from Harold's oak-paneled serenity. Background check on your son-in-law, Cody Johnson, she confirmed, reviewing the written request I'd provided. Financial history, credit report, any legal issues, known associates. She looked up at me. This is family business. Family protection, I said carefully. I need to understand potential liabilities. Her report arrived via encrypted email 2 days later. I printed it out and spread the pages across my kitchen table like a military strategist studying enemy positions. The picture it painted was even worse than I'd imagined. Cody Johnson was drowning, and he was pulling my daughter down with him. $4,000 to $7,000 in gambling debts to various creditors, including some unsavory offshore operations that didn't appear on official credit reports. Maxed out credit cards totaling $28,000. A personal loan from a payday advance company with a staggering 36% interest rate. Most damning of all, their mortgage was 3 months behind. The bank had already sent the first foreclosure notice, which they had hidden from me. Julia and Cody were living in a spectacular house of cards, maintaining their facade with desperate financial juggling and increasingly risky maneuvers. Every dollar I'd given them had flowed straight through their hands to various creditors, while they simultaneously accumulated more debt to maintain their glittering lifestyle. They weren't just irresponsible, they were pathological. I called Harold again that evening. Hypothetically, I began, if someone owed me a substantial sum and was simultaneously facing foreclosure from another creditor, what options would I have? Harold's voice was thoughtful. Well, if you held first position on any of the debts, you could demand immediate payment or force the liquidation of assets. You could also potentially purchase their outstanding debts from other creditors. Become their primary, or even sole, creditor. It's legally complicated, and there are specific procedures to follow, but it's possible. How long would such a process take? To purchase the debt? A few days, if you have the cash and know which collection agencies to contact. To then use that position to apply maximum pressure? That depends on how aggressive you want to be. Could be weeks. Could be, with the right legal maneuvers, a matter of days. I thanked him and hung up. Then I opened my laptop and began researching debt purchasing procedures in earnest. My engineering background had taught me that every system has its weak points, every structure its load limits. Julia and Cody had built their lives on a foundation of borrowed money, false promises, and emotional blackmail. All I had to do was identify the precise points of failure and introduce the right kind of stress. Their entire world would collapse under its own weight. That evening, as planned, I called Julia again. "Honey, I've got good news about that money we discussed." "Oh, Dad, thank God. When can you?" "Next week," I said, cutting off her eager interruption. "I'm setting up a family trust to handle the transfer. Makes it cleaner for tax purposes. We'll need to have Cody sign some paperwork, too, for the trust records." "What kind of paperwork?" she asked, a hint of suspicion in her voice. "Just standard procedure," I said, my tone breezy and reassuring. "Acknowledgement of the previous financial assistance, for the trust's records. It's a formality." After I hung up, I poured myself a measure of bourbon and walked to the window. Somewhere across town, Julia and Cody were probably celebrating their impending windfall, already planning how to spend money they thought was coming their way. They had no idea they were about to sign documents that would give me legal claim to everything they owned. They had no inkling that their benevolent benefactor had transformed into their most dangerous creditor. The game, as they had always played it, was over. A new one was beginning, and I was writing the rules. The following morning, I met Harold in his conference room. The space felt different now, more like a war room than a place for dry legal discussions. The mahogany table was covered with incorporation papers, bank routing numbers, and debt purchase agreements. Everything was legal, everything was documented, and everything was devastatingly precise. Midwest Recovery Services is now a legitimate, licensed collection agency, Harold said, sliding the final incorporation papers across the table for my signature. "You are the sole owner, completely separate from your personal assets. The state licensing came through yesterday." I signed my name with the Mont Blanc pen Sarah had given me for our 20th anniversary. Each signature felt deliberate, significant, like loading a bullet into a chamber. "The gambling debts?" I asked, looking up from the documents. "Purchased this morning for $18,000, Harold confirmed, his expression professionally neutral, though I caught a flicker of grim admiration in his eyes. "You now legally own $47,000 of Cody Johnson's obligations to those particular creditors. They were eager to sell. And the credit card debt. The charged-off accounts were purchased from 2 different agencies for a total of $8,500. You now hold $28,000 in credit card debt." I did the math quickly in my head. Combined with the gambling debts, I now held legal claim to $75,000 of their obligations for a total investment of just over $26,000. I owned their desperation. Timeline for the first collection demands. Legally, you can begin immediately. Standard practice is to send a formal 10-day notice, then escalate to legal proceedings if they default. I left Harold's office with the documents secured in my briefcase. Instead of going home, I drove to Julia's neighborhood and parked where I had a clear view of their house. The BMW still gleamed in the driveway. The perfect lawn still looked like something from a magazine. But I knew what was happening inside those walls now. I understood the rot beneath the paint. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca, the private investigator. First collection notices delivered via certified mail at 10:15 a.m. Through their large kitchen window, I saw Julia holding a thick envelope, her face ashen. Cody was pacing behind her, gesticulating wildly. Even from this distance, I could read the panic in their stiff, frantic movements. The irony was perfect. For 15 years, they had created financial emergencies to manipulate me. Now they faced genuine, legal financial emergencies, and the person they would normally call for rescue was the one who had engineered them. My phone rang. Julia's number flashed on the screen. I let it ring 3 times before answering, modulating my voice to sound concerned. "Dad." Her voice was thin, stretched tight with fear. "Something's happening. We're getting these collection notices from companies we've never even heard of. They're demanding immediate payment for debts we thought were settled or from places we never borrowed from." "What kind of notices, honey?" I asked, layering my voice with paternal worry. "This company called Midwest Recovery Services. They claim we owe them tens of thousands of dollars, but Dad, we've never borrowed money from any company with that name. Is that even legal?" "I believe it's fairly common in the collection industry," I said, my tone carefully neutral. "Companies buy old debt for pennies on the dollar and then try to collect the full amount. You should probably consult with an attorney." "We can't afford an attorney, Dad. I don't know what to do. These people are demanding payment within 10 days or they'll pursue legal action. They're talking about wage garnishment, asset seizure." The desperation in her voice was a tangible thing. It should have stirred some pity in me, some remnant of fatherly instinct. Instead, it felt like validation. It felt like justice, finally arriving after a 15-year delay. "I'm sorry you're going through this, Julia. It sounds very stressful. Could you help us figure this out?" she pleaded, the request tumbling out in a rushed, hopeful burst. "Maybe loan us enough to settle with these collectors. Just to make them go away. We'll pay you back, I swear, once we get back on our feet." There it was. The same request, wrapped in a new crisis, demanding an immediate, emotional response. The same manipulation that had worked for 15 years. "I'll need to think about it," I said, my voice deliberately slow and thoughtful. "This is a significant amount of money. Let me review my finances and see what's possible." "Dad, please," she whispered, the word a sob. "We're desperate." "I understand," I said, my voice cool and final. "Let me see what I can do." After I hung up, I sat in my car for several more minutes, watching their house. The curtains in the living room were now drawn shut. The perfect, cheerful facade was beginning to crack, and the darkness was seeping out. I started the engine and drove home. Tomorrow, the formal, 30-day collection process would begin. But I knew they wouldn't last 30 days. The pressure was already building, and they had no outlet for release. The siege was underway. The phone call came at 7:32 the next morning, jolting me from the first deep, peaceful sleep I'd had in years. The digital clock on my bedside table glowed in the pre-dawn darkness. I didn't need to look at the screen to know who it was. I let it ring 4 times, allowing myself to become fully awake, to center myself in the calm, purposeful space I had built. "Dad, you need to fix this. Right now." Julia's voice was a weapon, stripped of yesterday's frightened confusion and sharpened into pure, undiluted rage. It was a tone meant to intimidate, to command, the same tone she'd used since she was a teenager to get her way. I sat up, switching the phone to speaker and placing it on the nightstand as I poured a glass of water. "Good morning, Julia." "Fix what? Don't you play dumb with me." The words exploded through the speaker, loud enough to distort. "Cody figured it out. Midwest Recovery Services. He saw that name on mail at your house last month. You bought our debts. You did this to us." She was practically spitting. What kind of sick, twisted person does that to their own family? I took a slow sip of water, the cool liquid a counterpoint to the heat of her fury. The kind whose daughter told him he wasn't family anymore. I let the statement hang in the sterile air of my bedroom. The kind who is tired of being treated as a transaction. The silence on the other end was profound, a loaded void. I could hear Cody shouting in the background, his words a muffled, angry rumble. Then he grabbed the phone. "This is harassment, you old bastard." Cody's voice was raw. "We'll file a complaint with the state. We'll sue you for emotional distress. We'll have you committed for mental incompetence. You've lost your goddamn mind." I stood and walked to the window, pulling back the curtain to look at the quiet, sleeping street. "You're welcome to try," I said, my voice flat and unimpressed. "But you should know that threatening a creditor during active collection proceedings can itself be considered criminal harassment. I'm recording this call, by the way. For my records." Julia took the phone back, her breath hitching. "Dad, why? Why are you doing this to us? To your grandchildren?" The rage was receding, replaced by a wounded, pleading tone. Another tool from her arsenal. "Because you needed to learn that actions have consequences," I replied, my gaze fixed on a lone jogger making their way down the sidewalk. "Because 15 years of enabling you was the worst thing I could have done as a parent. I was supposed to prepare you for the world, not protect you from it. So this is you teaching us a lesson," she cried, her voice cracking. "By trying to destroy our lives. By making us homeless. I'm giving you the same consideration you gave me when you told me I wasn't part of your family," I said. "You're experiencing what it feels like to face a genuine financial problem without a personal bank to rescue you." That was just. I was angry. I didn't mean it. "Yes," I said, the word final as a judge's gavel. "You did." Cody wrestled the phone back. "What do you want? You want us to grovel? To beg? Fine. We're sorry. Okay. We're so sorry. We'll pay you back everything. We'll sign a payment plan, whatever you want." "Excellent," I said, my tone shifting to that of a businessman closing a deal. "You have 23 days remaining to settle the $75,000 balance in full. The payment instructions are on the notice." $75,000? Julia's voice was faint, disbelieving. "But we never borrowed that much from you." "No," I agreed calmly. "You borrowed that much from credit card companies and gambling establishments. I simply purchased those debts at market rates. It's all documented, legally assigned, and perfectly enforceable." "We can't pay that," Cody yelled. "You know we can't pay that. Then I suppose you'll need to liquidate assets," I said, my voice cool and analytical. "Sell the BMW. Downsize. Make the kinds of sacrifices I made for you all those years. The kind of fiscal responsibility you've so carefully avoided." The phone erupted into a cacophony of overlapping voices, Julia crying, Cody threatening, both of them talking over each other in a desperate, furious duet. I waited for a break in the noise. "I know about the gambling debts, Cody," I said, my voice dropping, becoming quiet and deadly serious. "I know about the payday loans. I know about the 3 months of missed mortgage payments. The bank's foreclosure notice. I know everything." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of their world, their carefully constructed house of lies, crumbling into dust. 23 days, I repeated into the void. "After that, I'll be forced to pursue all legal remedies, including asset seizure and wage garnishment." I didn't wait for a response. I simply ended the call. The phone immediately began ringing again. I ignored it, heading to the kitchen to start coffee. It rang 17 times before falling silent. I checked my voicemail. 7 messages. The first from Julia, sobbing, begging, her words barely intelligible. The second from Cody, a string of expletives and legal threats. The third was Julia again, her voice hollow with despair. The fourth was Cody, claiming he was calling the police. I deleted them all, one by one, their desperation washing over me without leaving a mark. Then I called Harold. "They know," I said when he answered. "The confrontation has begun. It's time for phase 2. Harold's warning came at 9 a.m., just as I was finishing my second cup of coffee. "They've retained Jonathan Meeks. He's already calling my office, making noise about elder abuse, undue influence, and financial manipulation. I wasn't surprised. Desperate people make desperate, predictable moves. What's his specific position? Standard intimidation tactics for this sort of thing, Harold said, his voice laced with professional disdain. He's claiming you're mentally incompetent, that the debt purchases constitute financial abuse of a vulnerable adult. He's threatening to petition the court for guardianship, effectively to have you declared incapable of managing your own affairs. Evidence? I asked, my mind already cataloguing my defenses. None that would hold up in a serious proceeding. A few hearsay statements from your daughter about you being forgetful. But he'll make your life uncomfortable for a while. He'll file motions, send letters to your financial institutions, try to create a paper trail that paints a picture of decline. By noon, the attacks were multi-pronged and vicious, just as Harold had predicted. My bank manager, a man named David Chen whom I'd known for a decade, called me personally, his voice awkward and embarrassed. Mr. Stewart, I'm sorry to bother you, but we've received a formal complaint, allegations of elder financial abuse. We're legally obligated to look into it, but I want you to know it seems highly suspect. I appreciate the call, David, I said. You'll find my accounts are in perfect order. My financial advisor, Charles Gibson, can provide any documentation you need. Next, a uniformed police officer arrived at my door, a young man with a kind, slightly uncomfortable face. We received an anonymous tip, sir, he said, hat in hand. A concern about your mental well-being. Said you might be a danger to yourself or vulnerable to scammers. I invited him in. I spoke clearly, logically. I showed him the file on my desk, the one labeled Midwest Recovery Services. I explained, in broad strokes, that I was involved in a legitimate business dispute with family members who were now resorting to malicious tactics. The officer took a few notes, his demeanor shifting from cautious concern to understanding. I'm sorry you have to deal with this, sir, he said before he left. It sounds like a difficult family situation. The social attacks were more insidious. 3 different neighbors called, their voices laced with confused concern. Arthur, Cody stopped by. He said you weren't yourself, that you were being taken advantage of by some con artists. Should we be worried? I reassured each one, my voice steady and sane, subtly suggesting that Cody and Julia were the ones in financial and emotional trouble. Julia reached out to my sister, Margaret, in Phoenix, sobbing down the phone about how I'd lost my mind, how I was destroying the family out of senile paranoia. Margaret, ever the peacemaker, called me, her voice tight with anxiety. Paul, Julia says you're having some kind of breakdown. She wants me to fly out and help manage your finances. I'm fine, Maggie, I said, my voice even. Julia and her husband owe me a great deal of money, and I am legally collecting it. They are trying to discredit me rather than face their obligations. The pause on the other end of the line was telling. That doesn't sound like the Julia I know. When's the last time you talked to her when she wasn't asking you for something? I asked. She was silent for a long moment. I can't remember. Julia even called our old pastor, Reverend Miller, claiming I needed a spiritual intervention for dementia. He, in turn, called me, his voice gentle but probing. Paul, I'm sorry to bother you. Julia suggested I check on your well-being, but frankly, you sound exactly the same as always. Are you having family difficulties? Some challenges with adult children who need to learn financial responsibility, I said. Ah, he said, and I could hear the understanding in his voice. I've counseled many families through similar situations. It's one of the hardest parts of parenting, knowing when to stop rescuing them. By that evening, their strategy was already backfiring. My bank, after a review of my impeccable transaction history, closed the complaint. The police officer filed a report noting that I was articulate, rational, and clearly competent. Most damaging to their credibility, neighbors, having spoken to me and seen the collection agency cars occasionally parked outside Julia's house, started asking uncomfortable questions. If Arthur is being scammed, why are the debt collectors going after Julia? Margaret called back after speaking with several other family members. Paul, nobody believes their story. Everyone remembers how much money you've given them over the years. Aunt Helen said Julia called her last month asking for a loan for a medical procedure she never had. The coup de grace came when Rebecca, my private investigator, texted me a photo. It was a close-up of a formal notice stapled to Julia's front door. The words "Notice of Foreclosure Sale" were clearly visible. The bank was not waiting. The clock was ticking faster for them than even I had anticipated. I made meticulous notes for Harold. Every false accusation, every attempt to damage my reputation, every lie they told to isolate me was now documented evidence. If this escalated to a courtroom, I had grounds for countersuits for defamation and malicious prosecution. My phone buzzed again. Julia's number. This time, I didn't just let it ring. I powered the phone off entirely. The silence that descended was luxurious. The siege was not of my making, but I was the one fortified behind walls of truth and documentation. They were the ones trapped in the open, exposed and increasingly desperate. Their attacks had failed. Their lies were being exposed one by one. And their house, the beautiful house I'd helped them buy, now had a death warrant stapled to its front door. I should have felt a surge of victory, of satisfaction. Instead, I felt something colder and more precise, the quiet assurance of an engineer who has correctly identified the point of structural failure. The equation was balancing itself. All I had to do was wait for the final, inevitable collapse. The voicemail Julia left was 11 minutes of raw, unfiltered desperation. I played it on speaker while organizing my study, her sobbing words a stark contrast to the methodical task of sorting files. She'd tried to buy groceries, she said. Her card was declined. She'd driven to 3 different stores, convinced it was a system-wide error. All declined. The bank had frozen their accounts and closed their credit lines after receiving my formal notification that I was calling their co-signed loans due immediately. Dad, they want $68,000 by next Friday. The car loan, the personal credit line, the home equity loan. We never even realized you were on all of them as the primary signatory. Of course they hadn't realized. They'd been too busy spending the money to read the paperwork, too confident in their manipulation to consider the legal small print. I deleted the message, the action feeling symbolic, like wiping a slate clean. Then I made my next call. American Family Insurance, a cheerful voice answered. This is Paul Stewart. Policy number 488-772-91. I need to remove my daughter, Julia Cody, her husband Cody Johnson, and their 2 children from my health insurance policy, effective immediately. The representative sounded confused. Mr. Stewart, they've been covered under your family plan for 8 years. Are you completely sure? Completely sure, I said, my voice leaving no room for doubt. Also, I'm changing the beneficiary on my life insurance policy. Julia Cody is to be removed. She will no longer receive any benefits. Sir, this is a very significant change, the woman stammered. There are tax implications. Do you want to speak with a counselor about the "No counselor needed"? I interrupted smoothly. Just process the changes. Email me the confirmation. 2 hours later, I had systematically dismantled every financial safety net I had ever provided them. The college fund I'd established for Emma and Tommy was closed, the funds transferred to a local children's charity. The emergency credit card I'd given Julia for true emergencies was cancelled, the card cut in half and discarded. The joint savings account we'd opened when she was a teenager, which she still had access to, was converted to my name only. Each phone call was surgical, precise, and utterly irreversible. I was no longer just collecting a debt, I was withdrawing my presence from their lives, revoking the privileges they had so thoroughly abused. By Wednesday, the siege was complete. Rebecca's surveillance reports, which arrived via encrypted email each evening, painted a vivid picture of their mounting desperation. Cody was working double shifts at the plant, his face haggard. Julia was seen pawning her wedding ring at a store downtown. Their arguments, once contained behind closed doors, were now spilling out into their driveway, loud and venomous enough for neighbors to hear and note. Their perfect facade was crumbling in real time. The BMW disappeared overnight, repossessed by the lien holder. Julia started driving a rusted, 20-year-old Honda Civic that Cody had borrowed from a coworker. The weekly lawn care service stopped coming, and the immaculate grass began to show patches of brown. The elaborate, expensive Christmas decorations that had made their house the envy of the neighborhood were sold off in a hurried Facebook Marketplace fire sale. Thursday brought the final, public blow. A sheriff's deputy, in full uniform, parked his cruiser in their driveway in broad daylight and posted the official eviction notice on their front door, a bright pink sheet of paper that was impossible to miss. He stood there for a full 5 minutes, ensuring the legal service was documented, providing a spectacle for the entire street. The humiliation was now official, and it was complete. That evening, my phone rang constantly. I had learned to recognize the pattern. First, Julia would call, crying and begging, her voice raw from hours of weeping. Then Cody would take over, his tone alternating between desperate bargaining and impotent threats. Then back to Julia, promising anything, everything, if I would just help them one more time, just this once. I let every call go to voicemail, building a digital archive of their collapse. Friday night, I sat in my study, the room illuminated by a single green-shaded desk lamp. I reviewed the week's documentation, a stack of papers that represented the systematic dismantling of a lifetime of my own foolishness. Harold had prepared a comprehensive report. Every debt legally transferred, every collection notice properly served, every financial support system methodically eliminated. It's been remarkably efficient, Harold had noted during our final call.